glad to share with you in some way. We want to make sure that you get a lot of stuff out of it. And the other thing is we don't want to talk the whole time. We want to set enough context and give you enough background so that we can maybe form some smaller groups and focus in, whether it's on the business case or some use cases you want to dive into, or whether you want to do a technical dive on some development stuff. We can drive some of those conversations afterwards. So just a little bit of background. Mike Hruska, my company's Problem Solutions. I formed it 10 years ago. I was a researcher at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a Department of Commerce government research facility. And I was working there on industry and academic partnerships to help government and industry with innovation on really difficult problems. And what I realized was oftentimes you can innovate better from the outside in. So I quit my job and started this company, and we've been working with Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs and Navy and other government entities to help them innovate from the outside. It's probably about 3/4 of the things that we do, and the other 25% is helping startup companies or product companies rethink what it is that they're doing in some ways. I started working with learning technology in 1997, installed the distance learning capabilities for the University of Pittsburgh campus that I was at, and I thought, this is going to be awesome. This is going to change the way that people learn. We're going to have one professor in one place who's going to be able to distribute the knowledge, and everyone's just going to get better together. And it didn't really work out. It wasn't awesome at all. In fact, the professor did exactly the same thing. They didn't engage with the satellite folks at all. There was no plan. There was no behavioral change. And I thought, this is a place where learning and technology intersected, and this was a complete failure in many ways. And so for the last 16 years, I've noticed that many times where learning and technology intersect, there's a significant amount of failure. I'm sure that you've had successes where you're at, and I'd love to hear about them, but many times there's failure. And I've kind of dedicated my personal focus and my company's focus towards solving that place and making it a better, rich place to live. And so for the last 5 years, we've been working with the folks at the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, which I'll tell you more about, to try to change that paradigm at that intersection. Tiffany?
Thanks, Mike. So my name is Tiffany Poeppelman. I'm currently working at Aptima. It's a small human-centered engineering firm. And so we mostly service the DoD and work with all services. I've primarily spent a lot of my time with the Army and the Air Force doing a number of efforts surrounding training and adaptive training, intelligent tutoring, and performance assessment, and what that looks like for the soldier. Prior to that, so my background is industrial and organizational psychologist, and really, our field is all about improving the workplace experience. And so when I went to grad school, I started in psychology, and I thought, I love people, and I want to help them and help them enjoy their job. And I didn't know how I would do that. So I took this journey and went and started working for a commercial consulting firm and kind of dabbled a little bit in R&D for the military, and then decided to take it full time. And it's really been a great experience. The military and the Department of Defense is really funding a lot of efforts to advance technology and science, and it's really great to see all the stuff that is going on, but it's not enough. I mean, the work we do is so cool, so we're excited to share it with you, but we want to take it beyond that and see it get utilized into the industry and academia. And so a lot of what Mike and I have been doing, and we're going to talk about, we think doesn't just apply to military. It really applies to everyone. And we were here earlier this week at a medical simulation conference talking to those folks, and another great group, education. We've been talking to folks there, and everyone has similar problems they're trying to solve. Everyone wants to get people to the right place at the right time, help reduce costs with training, and try to help make everybody happy. No one likes to take the same training twice, and everyone, wants to just grow. I mean, LinkedIn, think about, how many motivated and passionate professionals there are just here and everywhere else. And so how do you continuously challenge people and engage them every day so they stay? And that's the key of what we're trying to do. But, there's technologies to do that. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about and what we're passionate about. And we'd love to get some feedback from you and help us think about ways that we can continue to disrupt, this technology development and get some of these technologies used.
Logistics. Our emails are on here. Our LinkedIn profiles are on here too. We're going to reference a lot of stuff through tonight. If you send me an email, Tiffany an email, We'll send you a resources pack. The easiest thing is if you just take your card and stick it on that table there. And if you want the resources pack, I'm going to send you tech stuff that you can give to your tech team. I'm going to give you not just these slides, but other slides too, things that will help you think through the business case, a package of articles and some other stuff that will help you take your organization through some thinking. So just simple stuff here. Spend a lot of time talking to people about the Experience API. I've been working with the folks at ADL for over 5 years on thinking about the future of the thing beyond SCORM. So when I say SCORM, how many people have had their lives intersected by SCORM at some point in time? Raise your hand nice and proud. I'm sure you're very excited about that. And SCORM, for those of you that haven't raised your hand, SCORM was an interoperability specification that was created by the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative at the Department of Defense. In 1997, there was this thought that learning technology was really important. And Department of Education and Department of Labor and Department of Defense, along with the Clinton White House and Office of Science and Technology policy, said, learning technology, really important. We should get people to really focus in on that. And they created this Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative at Department of Defense. They created this thing called the SCORM. It was a good effort. It created more problems than it solved in many ways. And for many of you, you realize the rigidity of it and the inflexibility. And so now what we're going to be thinking about is this future past that. And so, but having conversations with people for a long time and saying, what are the things that you're doing? I love so many of the things you said, transforming the journey. That's such a powerful metaphor. Everyone's been really stuck in learning on the idea of a resource. And learning is all about resources. It's about books, it's about videos, it's about content. It is, but it's where we're really going is to a bit of a different place. We're becoming connected. We're not just connecting to content, we're connecting to experiences, but we're also connecting to people at some point in time. We learn from each other and those experiences that we have together, those great conversations, the informal hall things. I was giving a workshop recently about Experience API, and someone said, the biggest innovation thing that we do in our business is the informal conversations we have. We want to use Experience API to capture that. I said, that's a hard problem. I don't think that that's a really good idea. But you could ask people once a week, who's the person you had the best conversation with? And what was the conversation about? What was the context? And you can capture the rich data that's available there. So the point is, not all the data is important. Something to think about. For those of you that are paying attention to CES, we've got a lot of wearable stuff. No one's wearing Google Glass in here. Thank you. Appreciate that. Makes me feel a little better. I've got a few people in my office that are wearing them. So now we're even more connected. We can augment our windshield time. We can do all these other things. So what are we getting? Are we just getting emails and text messages? Are we getting valuable tidbits that might give us experience drift to the next place that we want to go in some way? I hear these words a lot about learning. The ideal learning environment, me to be wrapped inside of some learning ecosystem would have things like this. Tiffany, I know you love the word adaptive.
We do. Yeah, right now there's a big push going on. We hear adaptive learning or intelligent tutoring or accelerated learning, and everyone has these different phrases and what they mean, but it's really about reducing the cost, reducing the time someone spends in training, or how do we understand what they're learning and capturing that data, and how do we personalize their experience? Because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore, and it used to be we all took the same training, but the information and my background and maybe what I know might be different than what Mike knows. And so really, does he need to sit through the full course, or do I need to sit through it? And maybe there's just pieces and parts we really need, and maybe we don't need it at all. So how can we start to get people that customized experience? And we see it everywhere. I mean, you log into Amazon or you start interacting with Netflix, and it's always customizing your experience. Why aren't we doing that in our training environments? And it's not an easy thing to do. That's why. But there's a lot of research and a lot of people looking at this problem and these approaches and leveraging algorithms and persistent models, and it's getting exciting. We're heading in that direction. But then when it hits, how are we going to react? And but we need to get there, and we can continue to grow and work on that. But that's really where we're headed and what we see. And so we're really trying to rally the community and find out who's doing what, because we can do a lot more together than we can all independently. And so that's really what our call to action has been, is to really engage the community and get to know everybody and figure out what each other's doing.
So the infrastructure and the data collection methods, some people figure this out already. If you're looking at ads you're getting from Google or Facebook, they're for stuff that people want you to buy. But if it was for stuff that you wanted to learn, it would be a lot more interesting. You might have a higher probability of interacting with that in some way. So we do collect data about you. Other people collect data about you, and you are fed the opportunity to interact with things. Most often it's things that someone's trying to sell you. This is nothing new, but applying it to learning and to personal development and the ability to help individuals actualize, that's a bit of a new twist on it in some way. This is the idea of right time experiences. What's the right thing that I should really do next? If you had all the data in the world, I think that's the question you really want to answer. What should I do next? I don't care about 5 steps downstream. You know what's next. And thank you again, because you said transforming the journey. This is all about learning journeys. That's what we're really creating for our users. If we want to create high order, valuable experiences, it's all about the journey. So we have this idea of a learning ecosystem. And I hear more and more people talking about it. This year, the E-Learning Guild is hosting a conference in March. Shameless plug. Ecosystem 2014. It's going to be a great conference. I'm giving a talk on applying interoperable performance assessment to create a learning ecosystem. There's a ton of fantastic speakers. If the idea of a learning ecosystem resonates with you and you want to converse with other people, thinking about that design is probably a really good place to go. What's a learning ecosystem look like? Well, it's a place where you're getting the data you need when you need it. It's being pushed to you, or you're able to pull it. You might be experiencing it through games or videos or virtual worlds, or reading, or just text messages. I think we overlook the simplest things in life sometimes, and the spaced out ability that you can get from text message for reminding and reinforcing learning is something that you shouldn't forget about. But there are other things too, and we're going to talk about intelligent tutoring frameworks a little bit in the example ecosystem that we're going to show you. So we're going to take a little journey, talk a little bit deeper about Experience API, but eventually what we're going to tell you about tonight is an example learning ecosystem that we've been building for the Army in some way.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, we see day to day, everything is just changing the way we do work and changing the way we learn and how we're interacting with information and how we're growing individually. And as we do all these things, the big key to it all is the data. So if we wanted to know where you are, where your current state is, and what you've learned over time, how do we track that information? And, it's becoming more readily available or easier, big data problem. There's a lot of data everywhere. And so how do we start to capture that data that's meaningful and start to leverage it in order to personalize your experience? And so that's really what we're here to talk about, is thinking about those data sources and to provide that example.
So to really simplify this, if you're going to collect data, you really want to collect a lot of data about the learner themselves. You want to collect data about the content or the experience. That object might change through time. If you think about a MOOC, for an example, here's a MOOC, here's a course that's available. This many people signed up for it. This many people actually showed up. This many people actually completed it. But they might have different goals. And if we were collecting data both about the experience itself and the way that people interacted with it and the content, we actually could understand a lot more. Because ideally, at the end of the day, if we have the data about you and we have the data about the experiences, and we know where you want to go based upon polling you for skills or who you aspire to be, then we can understand, we can connect, and we can provision that right experience next. So some of the things we're going to talk about are going to fit in one of these buckets. The Experience API really fits in the data about the learner side. And the more rich that you can collect the data or encode the data, the more you get it in the middle between data about the learner and data about the experience. So what can support this? There's a couple things. You mentioned activity streams. How many people have done anything with activity streams? All right. So activity streams is JSON. It's a JSON-based way to represent a user's interaction. Social platforms are using this in some way. It is the basis for what the Experience API is, so it's a great way to capture data. So if you're already using platforms, someone said they're doing software training. Software-related training. So activity streams. You can, if you can connect to GitHub, getting data, looking at who the really effective coders are on things, you can combine that data with other stuff. That's a viable data source. This thing called the Learning Registry is built by the Department of Education. They have a website called free.ed.gov, and free.ed.gov is powered by the Learning Registry. And what it does is stores data about experiences. It stores metadata. It doesn't store the experience itself, but it stores metadata and paradata. Data about the experience and data about how the experience was used through time in some way. So we could open a picture, we can open a book and see a picture of a volcano, but we don't know that that picture of that volcano made a lot of successful volcanologists. We don't know really what content has a positive effect on learning. That's what the Learning Registry aims to solve, and it's collecting data about the experience. In conjunction with that, there's something called the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative. Microsoft and Yahoo and a couple other folks are working on that. And data that's published to the Learning Registry has this metadata associated with it. The idea is if we tag learning content the right way, then search engines should be able to find it natively without a lot of extra forceful hand jamming, tagging in some way. And then lastly, the Experience API, which we're going to dig into and talk a little bit further about. So the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, Personnel and Readiness, is the office that runs the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative, the folks that made the SCORM. And that same office is supporting an initiative called the Training and Learning Architecture. The Training and Learning Architecture, TLA, a three-letter acronym, also TLA, is a 4-part sort of project. And it's intended to fulfill a broad vision from the Pentagon around a personalized assistant for learning. It's the thing that's with us all the time. It helps us to get the right experience next. And so when I see the things that you're doing here and some of these other things, I'm saying, this is great because you're building this capability. You're doing it in the context of your own organization, but you're being present with the idea that having an LRS, getting other people's data and sharing the data that you have could be valuable in some way. So Experience API is the first of 4 areas that ADL is focusing on in the future. So each of these areas will have some corresponding spec. So Experience API is a spec. In the future here, we're going to see the learning profile. We're going to see content brokering and competency networks. I think these highly align with a lot of the conversations I've had with you guys. Now that you're tracking what people are doing, and we have an understanding what their profile is, and we know where they want to go, now we can get them the right content next. So I see a number of projects that fulfill these functional areas, but having the interoperability specs will make the ecosystem a lot more valuable.
I think each of those areas are challenges in themselves. There's still a lot of work to be done, and so that's why I think it's great that they're broken out at this point. And so really where we've started to work towards is the Experience API, just to demonstrate out some of this capability that ADL's been working on.
Why do so many people use LMSs? There's a Department of Defense instruction called 1322.26, which says, thou shalt be SCORM if you're buying an LMS or buying training content in some ways. So procurement for the DoD is connected to SCORM, and procurement for other government agencies is also connected to that. So ADL made the SCORM and helps write the instruction. So if ADL made the Experience API, you might assume that if that instruction was going to change, it would include the Experience API, and ultimately that training, games, simulations, and other things would be required to have that. That's a pretty safe assumption, I would think, if you add the parts up there. So what is it? It's a simple, lightweight web service type API, uses JSON, JavaScript object notation, to describe a learning experience in some way. You can do it with mobile. Has anyone tried to do SCORM in mobile? I love good laughter. Yeah, it's difficult. You can do it with mobile. We have built examples using a Connect, using Google Glass, using mobile, using games, using a variety of simulators. It's really fast, and we've taught a lot of companies to build things really quickly. We have a bunch of open source libraries and content that's available. It's part of the resource pack that I'll make sure that you guys have. Tracks experiences, not completions. Everybody that's dealt with LMSs, this is what we think about. How many completions am I getting? A lot of organizations think about how many hours of training and how many completions we've done. That's certainly one way to measure it. So something to think about there. Tiffany, you have any comment about that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And Experience API, one of the things, this JSON base, and I'm not a software engineer by any means, and I've learned to dip into their world a little bit, but it's a very simple approach to capturing data, and he'll tell you it's actor, verb, object, and it's just how the data is encoded. But it's almost too broad because the types of experiences we have in different environments and different modalities and different domains, it just really varies the types of data you would collect, which leaves a lot of wiggle room in there in terms of what you're collecting. And so that's why there's still some work to be done in Experience API, around Experience API in order to capture that data so that systems can effectively talk to each other, which is really the effort that we've been doing with the Army. But it is heading in the right direction and helping us where SCORM had the limitations. Experience API is moving in the right direction, but with the help of the community and everyone here and elsewhere, we can all work together to start to inform what that data is that's being shared.
If you could start tracking all of the learning within your organization tomorrow, really think about what you would track. Essentially, you could track everything if you wanted to, but would it be valuable? If you had really granular data about everything that everybody did at every level, would it be valuable? We had a Plugfest type event where people were showing off applications they built using XAPI, and there was someone there that had built a game, and it was a little drive the tank around and shoot game, and they were writing statements saying, I turned left, I turned right, I shot, I shot, I shot. And they shut them down from the community data store that we were using because they were producing a bunch of worthless data. So you probably don't want to be that person within your organization if you want to have a good relationship with your IT folks. Regardless of whether you're working in government or you're working in the commercial world, there are a couple big questions when you're thinking about human capital and learning and talent management. Who are my rock stars and what do they eat for breakfast? Who are the best people at what they do? Who are my great salespeople? Who are my great leaders? Because I want more of them. And so if I can understand what experiences they've had that have been formative, not all the things they've ever done through their entire life, but things they've done in the context of my organization, I can't clone them, but I certainly can approximate their development in some way. Other questions that, is this person ready to do something? And if not, what are the list of learning experiences that they might have to get them quickly to that level of capability? These are big questions, and I urge you to start with these before you try to apply any technology. Make sure, obviously, that you have some solid business case, but make sure that you have a purposefully defined question that you're trying to answer first, especially if you're thinking about doing a pilot in some way and you'd like to persist the project beyond the pilot. So as far as drivers, within an organization, every organization's different. Your talent and your talent management strategy is going to differ in a lot of ways. And these are some of the things that I've had people talk about through time. But as far as tying this into cost, these are things that I'd love to hear about in discussion. So like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? You want better, more efficient software engineers. What does that get you at the end of the day? Or you want better salespeople, or people that are retiring that you want to do better knowledge management with, or better staff transitions. These are the things that could be really good drivers to produce a learning ecosystem. From the industrial organizational psychology perspective, there's a ton of problems that organizations have.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely there is. There's a ton, and we think about, again, companies care about money, the bottom line, how much you're saving. And from the individual trainee perspective, we just want to learn and grow and get back on the job. And the organizations feel the same way. How can we get the learner or the employee the information they need to do their job and get them back on the job faster? And it all comes down to the bottom line. And those are just some types of drivers that push us to thinking about what data to capture or what's meaningful. And there's a number of them, especially time lost. And this is all not just from an organizational perspective, but from an individual employee level, right? So we think about it from all perspectives.
So nuts and bolts, Experience API has a format called a statement, and these are what a system would create. So if I were something that was serving up videos to the employees, I would be serving up things actor, verb, and object, triple, and this would be described in JSON. I'll show you a code example, and we can talk afterwards more about on the tech side. But I would say Tiffany watched this video, so very specific data about what she did, and that's pretty simple. But where things get really rich and really interesting is when you start to think about the context. within which she watched it and what the result was in some ways, and encoding that. And our research has really been focusing on that. SCORM's really rigid. Experience API is really flexible. That produced a number of problems. You could run with scissors and create a lot of really worthless data. It might be worthwhile to you, but to be a good data steward for other people, you want to create things that are meaningful for inter and intra-system adaptation as possible. So our work is, we've been working on some best practices for encoding really rich ways to talk about human performance in the context and the results and the extensions part. And that's some stuff we'll share with you in a research paper that we won't bore you with all the details here. So here's an example, experience API statement, actor, verb, and object. Pretty simple. If you've seen JSON before, it's not that scary. If you haven't written any code, it's still not that scary. There are generators and there are tools. You don't need to write this. For those of you that code, obviously, you'll be passing parameters into some libraries. There are a bunch of open source tools available. There's Java library, C++, C#, Python. So your developers shouldn't be able to make an excuse that this is painful to do. I've seen people up and running with their existing application, writing code in under 2 hours. But I've seen it as long as 2 weeks too. So it just depends on what you want to do. Where does the data go? It goes to this place called the Learning Record Store. An LRS is a database that stores JSON. It's very simple. I don't want to make it any more complex than it needs to be. It's not a learning management system. Although your learning management system does store data about users and interactions, the LRS just stores data about users and interactions and follows the JSON format for the Experience API.
An emerging technology or emerging capability that was developed by ADL in order to store those JSON-based statements. So those two, it allows it to store the information, and this is open and available for anyone to go to ADL's website, and there is an LRS available for anyone to leverage. And so just to kind of put that in perspective there.
You don't need to buy one. There's an open source one available. There are two open source ones available. ADL built one, and there's someone called Learning Locker that has one as well.
So the question you talked about, one of the huge benefits of Experience API sounds like central repository that people are sharing data into collectively and pulling data. With your first example where you talked about Google and social data, they're obviously using this type of data to create recommendations. How will the true benefit of this be realized with companies like that probably don't want to share it? Or even like I think a LinkedIn, our system. I don't know if LinkedIn's ever really going to let me share the learning data from our employees with other people. How do you think about that, or who will share this data versus who will just have to do it themselves?
Yeah, so data-wise, we live in feudal times. You're toiling the land and everybody else gets the benefit. You don't own it, unfortunately. There are a number of emerging business models around personal data locker. They're moving at a certain velocity. Will they increase? I don't know. Could your data be stored many places? Could some be mine and some is yours here at this organization and some is in multiple places? Yes. One discussion that I won't dig too deeply into, but something you should think about is a statement, active verb object context results. Who owns the data? If my company tracks that data about me, do they own the data? Do I own the data? Do we both own the data? Or do they own a part and I own a part and we own a part? It's a custody battle waiting to happen. We're having that conversation at the spec development level, and it's going to be pretty meaningful because there's a spec side, there's policy, there's technology, and there's strategy for implementation because you want adoption. So there are some challenges there. I would have to assume that there will be some really cool emerging companies that will really solve that problem because it's a problem worth solving from a money standpoint.
Yeah, and in the example we'll provide, and we'll talk a little bit about our project and what we've been doing with the Army. We had went through this endeavor and then at the end met a great company and signed them up as early adopters. We really had a nice conversation about data, and we were able to walk with them because of our best practices that we had developed with the Army and work with their software engineers. We were able to encode data from their simulator without touching any of their IP in a matter of weeks. So they didn't have to expose anything. It was a legacy system, and we were able to see that it works. Now, when it starts getting into privacy and how do you avoid, attaching data to Jane Doe, and that's a different subject, right? But the idea is just the first part of this journey is to break down the barriers and just to share that data. How would you encode it? So we're definitely taking these one step at a time, and there's a lot of people thinking about all of these issues and things that we'll be up against. But
yeah, so sorry?
All the LMS companies out there building LMS.
So that's a really good question. You'd have to think that if you're the guy that currently delivers learning and you're the guy that's currently tracking learning for people, and suddenly there was a capability for someone else to make a technology that just tracked it, you probably want to build an LRS inside of your LMS. So if you have an LMS vendor that you're working with, your client's working with, the question I urge everybody to ask is, hey, are you going to build an LRS for me, or do I need to go buy one somewhere else? So see what data that is. I can tell you that more of the LMS vendors, and I can't say specifically who, but more of them are saying, ooh, I guess we need to do this because the adoption's there, the demand's there, and they're starting to get a lot of hard questions. So I'd encourage you to ask that question.
And when you talk to a software engineer, they understand JSON. That's not new. It's not something that they don't understand. The question becomes, it's easy to implement it, but it's what do you track? It comes back down to that question of what's meaningful. And so that's really where we've been spending the time trying to understand from a performance standpoint, performance measurement data, what is the meaningful data. And again, it varies by domain, but if we can keep it general and start to provide a little bit of guidance, then the data that you would encode, the data he would encode, would ideally talk to each other. But we all have to talk the same language, and that's the trick.
And so digging in deeper into some of the work that we've been doing, we tried to put this definition. We've been working with some of the community partners and military and some of the academic folks to try to put a marker out there for us to work towards. And so we have this definition of interoperable performance assessment, the other IPA. Right?
Yeah, that's hashtag the other IPA.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, so we've been working with the Army, and as we were going down this path, we wanted to have some sort of target or something to put out for the community to understand what our intentions were. It's a very broad definition. It's one that's in progress. We always ask for feedback, but it was something just to kind of get everybody on the same page of what we were trying to do and what we are trying to do. And really, it's all about uniformly defining and describing data. Again, it's how can we understand what's meaningful about the performance data in order to have it talk to each other so that we can adapt training, right? So there's that term again, so that we can personalize the learning experience. And typically we find most of the data is usually either assessed by some sort of trainer, it's either captured through a system, it can be asserted by another trainer. There's data everywhere. And how we get it, we're not so picky, but it's out there. And so we wanted to just bring this to light so people can understand where we're headed. And then, of course, we came up with a visualization to try to describe the components. Now, it's definitely, we designed this one with the military in mind, and a conference that we had presented at in this past December. And so if you start with the learner in the lower left, or the soldier, you can imagine at any given time he has to go out and take a number of trainings, whether it's instructor-led or it's mobile, perhaps it's live fire or some sort of field training. And then at some point he is assessed or observed, and then that data is captured. Well, if we could track that data across time, we would be able to adapt that soldier's experience and get him to the right place at the right time. It's too often that we found the helicopter pilot would tend to have to go through the same simulator scenarios, and when you're getting deployed to different locations, you may not need the same situation that you're preparing for. And so we want to try to reduce that, and so that's what our intent's been.
So, we have this notion of IPA. We've been developing some best practices for how do I define and describe human performance in some way, and how do I take that definition and description and extend the richness of the Experience API statement. We have a best practices guide for encoding. It's built on something called HPML, a Human Performance Measurement Language. It's some work that Tiffany's team had done. But really, IPA can be a guide if you want to adapt or personalize learning. And I think that many people want to adapt and personalize learning. The question is, at what cost is it worth it? Many of the adaptive learning systems are very expensive to define and develop. So, yeah, absolutely. Great question. So what we've been trying to do with our work is constrain it to a very specific, very static domain, and then move outwards from there to some other domains. So I guess my question would be back to you is, what do you think would be a really hard and challenging domain? And let's start to talk about that, because we're trying to take some of the structure and ideas that we believe are grounded, that we've been validating, and apply those to some other domains. So what do you think would be a terribly hard domain to attack? Some maybe software engineering training or
field of study.
Yeah, what field of study or organization that's a specific organization with a specific set of problems that you think would be on the other side of the scale? Okay, no, it's good. And so why don't we could dig into that one and once we wrap up, let's whiteboard out a use case together on that. That's great. I think that's good. This is what I was hoping, is that we would get some ideas that. Go ahead.
I just have a comment about not throwing out any of this military information you're gaining. I already have experience when it came to terrorist threat self-protection. Mm-hmm. A learning curve that was set up so that based on where you were going, what your experience was, that you were directed to the right kind of training. Introductory, because you're traveling by air; advanced, because you were going to be alone in a country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was known through knowing the mission and the person and their prior learning and what the whole range of what was available. It was very tailored. You did not get the personal terrorist protection 101. Mm-hmm. You got personal protection that was going to protect you in a country of risk. So it is very adaptive and needs to be in that environment.
That's a good point.
In the military, I mean, certainly the dynamic continues to change, and war changes, and the enemy changes, and how we adapt to the enemy, and how we protect ourselves, and what we do out there. I mean, there are a lot of similarities between an organization and what a team is trying to do that's out in combat. And so I think you're absolutely right. There is a lot of dynamic and change that's happening. And so how do you prepare someone for that when they don't have an LMS readily available in the field to look up something and take a training? And so you can only prepare them so much and then send them out. And then how do you capture whether they've learned that information? And there's no way to really test that. So, I mean, I think there is some value in it. And it's just an approach that we're taking. And military, there's a lot of requirements to do your job. Just like we all have job descriptions, they have requirements that you must meet. And so it's been a great experience to be able to work through that with the Army. And specifically, we've been working with RDECOM, the Army Research Lab in Orlando. And these folks are definitely thinking forward and have really been working with us to figure out this problem. And we've been trying to identify people that are producing data, people that are consuming data, and then finding people that are in between to start to try to encode that and take it one step at a time, to start with that use case and continue to grow it out to other domains, because it's not an easy problem, and then grow it from there. So what we did is we leveraged some of these open source technologies and tools that the Army's been building, like GIFT and SCALE, the Soldier-Centered Army Learning Environment. And GIFT is a generalized intelligent framework for tutoring. It's open source. Anybody can download the code and utilize it. And so what we did is we had developed a prototype, a web service, if you will, a viewing window into the LRS. So Mike had talked about the learning record store is just a data repository. There's no real way to see the data inside of it. So for our effort, we had developed this SP2, or the Soldier Performance Planner, we called it, as a way to look at that JSON data in order to add additional data, connect web services so that you can share that data, and really demonstrate this proof of concept, because we just sat around and thought, wouldn't this be cool? We could do this. And so we got software engineers together and we built this concept. And the architecture that you see here is really the one that we had provided the Army to demonstrate this capability. So we leveraged data from simulators. We leveraged observer-based data that was collected during an exercise. And as Mike had mentioned, that data had been encoded. It's a human performance measurement language and XML schema. And what we did is we then encoded it in the XAPI. I know you think I'm a software engineer. I've got this down now, right? But so it's really interesting how it happens. But from an IO perspective or workplace perspective, we're just trying to share the data. And this XAPI format really allows us to do that. And so it gets kind of exciting when you get into the technology development and you see how it happens. I have respect for software engineers, and I don't know how they do it, but I respect it. And so what we did is through SP2, we had demonstrate this capability to have the data. GIFT was able to receive the data and do macro adaptation and actually say, because you were at competency or above competency in XYZ, therefore you don't need to take this training. And so we were able to demonstrate that out. And so we're going to continue down this path. We have more follow-on work with them to continue to look at not just individual data, but team data. So how can data about an individual inform a team, and how can team data inform the individual, and continue to work with trusted partners and folks that are interested in sharing their data so that we can continue to validate our approach.
Yeah, what essentially we did was take 4 independent groups and 4 different technologies and find a way for them to create data that the others found value in some way. So we took simulator data from a helicopter. We took data about someone watching someone in that simulator from a different platform, and we encoded that data and put it in the learning record store. Based on that, we have this thing called GIFT, this intelligent tutoring framework, and we built a listener for it that pulled the LRS and looked for an event where you were at, above, or below competency or a concept in some way. So if you had things planned in your learning path out in the future and you were at or above the concept or the competency, it would remove those from your learning path and tell you why those things were removed. Very simple rules, adaptive learning engine. If you were below competency or concept, it would look for content that it could use and would put it into your learning path. Pretty simple. It will be packaged with the GIFT framework here in the next couple of weeks. I believe will be out. So this is the example ecosystem we built, where things are producing data, other things are consuming data, and some things are both consuming and producing data. Some things that we're looking out for in the future are, what are better ways that we can represent a profile in some ways? And I saw some really cool stuff today here, and visited some other folks in the Valley here. They're doing some really cool things to represent profiles. Now, how can we look at the competencies and give someone an idea of where it is, not that they're at already, but where they're going, and not make it overbearing and scary for them in some way, where it's too daunting of a task to even get there. And then if we had this data, a conversation earlier with someone tonight, if I came to you, to your LMS, and was experienced some classic e-learning content, and you had data from the LRS about me, how would you adapt your e-learning course? What would you want to know? Would you want to know what I knew or what I didn't know, or what I was good at, or if I liked the color purple or if I didn't? I'd be really interested for those of you that are developing e-learning content to determine, what do you really want to know and what is worth knowing about that? So, yeah.
When we partnered together, our companies, one of the things that we've been doing at Aptima for a number of years is using this XML schema, HPML. So we already had it. It's a way that we've, over a number of years, contextualized performance data. And so what we did is we just had proposed using it as a starting place. One thing we understand is not everybody writes HPML. We are working towards making it in open format or standard, but at the same time, understanding it was just a way that we could represent performance data and encode it in the XAPI. And so that's really what the SP2 is doing, is it's serving as that encoder that's there and that's available. But we've also, in the upper right, you'll see the simulator and you see the two-way arrow. We did have a working concept that we've been working with a simulator end-to-end company, end-to-end simulator development company, and we were able to leverage their data, which was not HPML, and we were able to just write straight XAPI JSON-based statements and have that be communicated to SP2. So that on the left was really our first proof of concept, but we're evolving from there because everyone has different data sources. So.
Yeah, so we had data from the beginning that was described at a meaningful level of granularity. So we didn't just have the helicopter's position and communications and response times. We had the fact that someone was an ineffective communicator in a situation and the contextual data to represent that. And that was described in HPML. And that covers things like the conditions, the task, the goal, the mission, some things that are relevant in a business context and some things that aren't relevant. We use the HPML data to do it, but what we're building right now are some libraries that allow you just to say experience dot phase, if you're writing code and being able to pass some parameters into that to encode the data directly by understanding what it is that you want to grab.
And we did focus, when we analyzed HPML, we looked at those constructs, as Mike had mentioned, at a high level to understand that some things were optional and some things should be required. People typically collect a role or a position of what you are because that tells them what you should be learning, and there's usually learning objectives associated with training, so we can assume those would likely be there, and things like that. And then other information that maybe we've captured because of a domain may not be there, but how would you encode it if you had it? Because if we're going to try to capture everybody's potential data sources, what would that look like? And so we don't think we have everything at this point, but we're going to continue to grow that.
Residency, their certification, their boards.
Mm-hmm.
Is it capable now but not being done, or is it not capable yet to take the records of the last year's surgeries of that surgeon, code the critical data, mortality rates, infection rates, et cetera, so that when this physician is now up for continuing education, I'm not going to spend any time on bloodborne pathogens. They're doing fine. I'm going to spend all my time on infection, et cetera, et cetera.
Were you listening to our conversation on Monday? That's what we were at the Society for Simulation for Healthcare, and we were talking about interoperable performance assessment in that context so that we could better connect the learning that someone's done with the performance that they're realizing to attenuate the learning in the future. So absolutely. So are you working with some folks in that domain?
I have worked with healthcare in the past, and that is one of the, and that applies to anything. I mean, I can pass a test to know how to design a user interface, but none of my user interfaces have ever worked in the field. Mm-hmm. That person needs a different type of training, and that's why I'm wondering if we could capture that downstream in the performance.
Yeah, appearance of activity does not equal progress, right? So it would be really nice to be able to get that data and connect it to performance. So absolutely with you.
Is it possible though now?
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely possible to get the learning data. If the systems were adapted to collect the performance data, and if you put an LRS in and you start attaching systems and pushing data in there, it's easy to start to look into the LRS. For data science, folks get really excited about that by saying, "Oh, there's going to be a simple format that I can push into there and then start doing some data analysis on." That's pretty exciting.
Each of these being kind of trained, or how are each of these being defined? Are there definitions for different domains? And I know you talked about, hey, we create a definition so people know how to put things into experience in there. But it seems like each of those, you'd want examples of, oh, here's the type of data we'd like to collect, here's how we're going to format it. If it's my employee ranking at the end of the year versus my assessment on this versus anything else. Are you guys creating that? Do people need to create that themselves? Is that just to share data and stuff like that about it?
Sure. So right now at ADL, there's a design cohort project that's about to kick off. We're trying to find some people from different domains that can collaborate together within their domain to produce some example context that then can be shared. So we've done this military one, and we've kicked off 2 new ones, one with MedSim and one with education now that we're doing. We really want to try to find some more and share what we've done to help people get there faster in some ways and save time. But there's a scope that is meaningful for people to define how to encode. So if you're going to encode data for technical training at technical institutes, that may or may not be similar to what you're doing at community colleges or something in some way. We think there are a handful of domains that will have some crossover, but in general, that you're going to see a little bit different in med, a little bit different in ed, a little bit different military, and then corporate to some degree. But I'd love to see an enumerated list that this entire group agreed upon that were cool, that were the specific, finite domains that we should tackle. So trying to give you enough context that, you can really think about, what are the use cases in your organization? If you're a sales organization, all right, who are the best salespeople and what have they done? And what do other people think of them? And who trusts who or who communicates with who the most? There are a lot of things that you can get. The example I mentioned earlier about what's the most influential conversation you had this week and who was it with and what was the subject. If you collected that data, if you had 5,000 employees or 10,000 employees, you can get a lot of really rich, interesting data about trust networks and flow and respect in an organization. That could be pretty valuable. What other data could you overlay with that in some way that would start to get to the questions of who are my rock stars and what do they eat for breakfast and how do I make more people like that? So I don't know if anybody has any ideas on use cases that like to throw out and maybe have some discussion around in any ways. I think that's really interesting. I've had some dialogue with one larger company about emerging areas that they have because they're always creating new teams, and those new teams are tasked with creating new common knowledge between the team and doing search and finding shared context and then starting to define roles and responsibilities and then people filling those in some way and then building that into the institutional memory and then recruiting and filling and growing out those. That's a design pattern that a lot of organizations face. But I like the fact that you're saying, but stretch that out to an industry scale. So how are we going to get more data scientists? What makes a great data scientist? There are a lot of things that do, but what makes the best data scientist in some way? What are those experiences that are really formative? And then how are we recruiting for people that have those, or how are we developing talent at a broader scale in some ways? I think this is parallel to the STEM problem in education in a lot of ways.
I would say on the flip side, also think about what competencies do they have that may not be exactly what you need, but maybe you could train them on the others that they might need to do the job. And it's a great point you bring up. It's how do we measure that, and what is the data? What do we know where they've been and where they're going, and if it's aligning, right? Because we used to be in a society where you would spend 30 years with a company and you would just have a deep expertise, and now companies really want people with broad experiences, with just a little bit of depth, because they want you to be flexible and adaptable, right? There's that word again. But it's interesting, and how do you capture that information? And I think it's a great point. It's definitely the talent acquisition and the organizational cycle, right? Find the right talent, bring them in, you train them, you keep them, and you groom them, and the cycle, it continues. So it's a good point.
It's really interesting. I saw a startup pitch in New York City about 3 or 4 months ago, and what they do is they assess a software engineer, and then they determine the gap between what the position description is and where they're at, and then they give them a learning path to get there. And they're working with companies that are having a hard time filling unique niche software engineering positions in some ways. Yeah, so a couple things. LRS makers realize that you might move data to them or from them in some ways, so they are building those features. We just previewed a project in January 15th in Washington with Department of Education. We worked with the World Bank and edX, MOOC platform, and a few other companies to develop a way that you could take your data about you that you experience in the edX MOOC and be able to make that portable and export that. It's not using Experience API in this version. It's using a PESC format for the data, but having that data portability is absolutely key. You can make the assumption there's not going to be one huge learning record store in anytime soon, but there could be. And if there isn't, there's got to be an opportunity to take your data with you in some ways, or to move it from one place to another, or to make a certain amount of it available to something that you might be going to.
Unless the NSA gives us all access to our own.
I'm unable to comment on that. Massive emerging area discussion. So I'll throw a couple things. One, in Experience API spec, statements are immutable. They cannot be erased or destroyed. Well, that's a problem because the European Union, that doesn't work. So that's one of the things being worked on the spec right now. The National Research Council released last week a report saying the way that we think about IRBs, institutional research boards, is never going to work to unlock the value of data and education research. So we need to rethink it. I'm involved with a group that's meeting in March to explore that further. So how do we capture it? How do we follow FERPA and all the other education-related things? So there's an emerging conversation there. There's a lot of momentum at the policy and the national level in some ways. So that's a pretty exciting space, because imagine if you had all the K-12 data about what was effective, and if people knew how to make great procurement decisions at the school level, how much money could be saved and how many more children's lives could be affected. That's massive, massive impact. I'm punting on that. Well, I say that for a couple of reasons. That's network responsibility. We don't really solely hold that in our world. We control the domain of any of the experiments really well that we're doing, but we don't really get deeply involved in a lot of the hosting and production scale systems in some ways. But you have network security, you have encryption, you have standardized things to protect data in some ways. Yes, data gets breached. I won't mention any organizations that have been breached recently publicly. But yes, data gets breached, but a lot of data is protected too. And that's an industry and a conversation, I think, in itself.
I agree. I mean, we hear it all the time, even from military customers that we've been working with. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation of, so you have this data and it's associated with this person. That's a privacy, concern. And right now, a lot of these simulators think military are capturing and containing the data, not just for their own purposes, but also because they're being told not to share it. And so we understand it's something that and more discussions will need to be had, and that's above, that's above our pay grade, so to speak. So, we'll let those conversations happen. But for now, let's dream big and think about the art of the possible, and just start small in the places we can, and we can take this Experience API, JSON-based format, and start to think bigger and start to gather, test data, and start to see, what we can do, and then continue to grow. And if we all push it forward, they'll have to figure out the problem. And I think we're heading in that direction. So. Well,
and I can tell you a lot of the problem areas that you're bringing up, there are emerging business models that are really cool that solve those. So identity brokering is the scope of a subject that's really interesting, that I know a few startups that are thinking about using that and solving that problem. So that's, with problems come solutions.
Company, problem solution.
Yeah.
He put a plug in there.
Thank you very much.
He gives you more problems than solutions, in case you're wondering.
Other thoughts? So here's just a couple things for you. The list of who's doing what is changing. So I'm just going to share the URL. Like I said, we'll push this stuff out so that you guys can get access to this. There are a couple things that are going on. There's a bunch of open source projects. There are a bunch of GitHub repositories. You don't have to start from zero if you're going to do something in some ways. There are a bunch of adopters. There are LMSs that have said that they're adopting. There are other products that said they're adopting. There are brand new companies from the ground up that are building things that are pretty freaking cool that I've seen some really cool K-12 assessment stuff where teachers are able to assess students on the fly, and it's helping to route the teacher's attention and focus so they can manage larger class sizes better, or manage the class size they have in a more effective way. There's a lot of really cool stuff. I'm trying to keep my arms around all of it, but it's difficult sometimes. So these are some places that you can look, and like I said, we'll push this stuff out. So I know we're getting close to the end here, and I'd love to even dig into some technical conversation, but I know some people might not want to dig into that. So we're going to hang out here for a while and have some final thoughts about this stuff. So a couple things that I think you should think about as a takeaway. If you're going to do a prototype or a pilot in some way, pick 2 things that you want to do. Pick the intersection of 2 data sources. Don't try to create too much data from either of the data sources. Really try to constrain that to find something meaningful at the intersection. If you create a big data problem for yourself out of the gate, it's going to be hard to prove any value. Make sure it's aligned with some question that you're really trying to answer. And then consider granularity. At what size does any of this matter? Completion is the concept that we have a lot related to LMSs, but is it about completion? Is it about progress? Is it that someone had the experience, or they started it, or they finished it? Think about those things in some ways. There's a lot of opportunity for failure, so I urge you to think about what's meaningful and make sure that your data has some value at the end.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things going on right now in the community, and as Mike said, it's very hard to track all of it. And you get in these pockets of communities of people doing this work, and a lot of open source, a lot of open community development movements going on. And so definitely take advantage, and that's one of the things we've been doing. So all the work we do for the Army, we're giving it out to the community. You know, at this next endeavor that we're taking with them, we're going to have things up on websites and try to get it out, and we'll send it to you. And I think that's where things are heading. And so take advantage. And if you have any questions, let us know. But it's exciting times we're in. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. And so, you know, we're always looking for people who want to push things forward and really help, you know, get things going in the right direction. Disruptive, love that word, right? Try to disrupt.
We'll share data with you and help get you started. If you have any questions, please ask. Totally glad to help you. The only thing I ask in return is share with us what you do that works, that's cool. And if you find something that doesn't work, share that too, and tell me that you don't want me to share your name with it, because we can all learn from each other. The LMS market became really big because it's tied to procurement. This stuff's going to be tied to procurement too. So there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of very interesting things in the emerging space. So I want to thank you guys for hanging out. Everyone's been sitting quiet and still for a really long time. And once again, thank you guys here at LinkedIn for being awesome hosts and providing the space and the place and food and drinks and everything. So thanks, guys.